end his presidential reelection campaign, bringing an abrupt and humbling conclusion to his half century long political career. He is now endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris to take his place. Joining me now with his reaction is Trump's senior campaign surrogate, former SBA advocate for the White House, and 2016 former executive director of the National Diversity Coalition, Trump, Bruce Lavelle. Bruce, thanks for coming on, friend.
Hey, good morning. How's it going?
I'm doing pretty well. It was a very, very momentous weekend. I had to jump on SiriusXM and do 2 hours of live coverage on the fly, literally, at 30 minutes notice. And we were talking about this very eventuality. Now, a lot of people are screaming DEI hire. They're saying things about Kamala Harris. So they're setting the stage for a very rough joust between her and President Trump. Talk to me about your thoughts on Vice President Kamala Harris possibly becoming the president of the United States.
Well, it's interesting because I spoke about this on another network this morning, and this is buzzing. There are two power structures fighting right now. Obviously, the Obama team is not giving her any love, not endorsing her, and then you have the Biden side. So there are two DNC power structures going on, fighting and jockeying. They're really in a catch-22, Stacey, because she is the VP, we see Biden is stepping down, and so they're cautious enough, quote, on the black vote in general in itself. So they're walking around on eggshells. But I will say this is a guy that's been in the game since Reagan, dating myself. But it will be to the point where he will release the delegates. They're going to have a very chaotic convention, I promise you, in terms of who they're wanting to put up and for their nominee. But I will say this, we're 106 days until November 5th. It's going to be a steep climb to name ID and get an apparatus up and going to have a play. It's going to be very hard for them to do that in itself, and they know that. So either way, it's going to be a rough road for the Democrats, period.
So, Bruce, one of the things that I keep getting asked about is whether or not she truly has credibility within the Black community, whether different constituency groups within Black America recognize her as one of us and different things like that. And then, of course, there's the overarching theme that, she's also of Indian American heritage. That's, a growing population in America. She has, a very marked history of bragging about incarcerating people for possessing marijuana in
Mhm.
California, where you can literally rape someone and not go to jail. So what do you make of her so-called Black credibility?
Well, I know a lot about that actually. A lot of family that live in California, obviously. And the thing is, remember when she ran the Attorney General's office, she was using the Indian American hat. you know? So it's kind of like, is it door number one or door number two? So, that in itself, you can poke through all the credibilities in her using her culture to benefit her, et cetera. But it is truly on record and factual that she used her Indian culture in order to pitch to get into the AG's office. So it is a chameleon style person, obviously from her track record, as well as her climbing onto her pathway to being the VP. We all know the relationships with Willie Brown and many other, with Montel Williams, et cetera. The list goes on and on. And then to your point earlier in what you said earlier, her bad record on prosecution and literally laughing on tape about marijuana indictments that were predominantly Black men. So it is going to be a tough climb. And then just like before, she has a tremendous amount of rhetoric calling Joe Biden racist and all the other things. So it's like now he's not so there's so many holes you can poke in her quote credibility. And then the fact that look at her, what she's did as a VP, nothing. She was in charge of the border. And Stacey, did she go one time? I think once.
Just
And
once.
so, yeah, so you put that responsibility on her, and you see how disastrous that is. So it doesn't look good. And the Obamas are smart. They know that. That's why they're not putting their name on her. And the only reason why she has this other side is because they're terrified. And I hate to use this word, the DEI troops are like, you can't touch her. She's a Black woman. So,
That's
they're
right.
dealing with a lot of stuff going on. And then the Clintons are just rolling the dice, throwing in there. They probably could really care less, honestly.
They honestly, I don't think the Clintons really care for her. They don't hate her. I think they
Right.
come in kind of camel and neutral. Their interest is maintaining their influence within the party structure so they can continue to
Right.
protect themselves from, she has some very serious issues. So one thing they've done by opening this door up and prosecuting Trump post presidency is, Bruce, they've opened themselves up to, all of them have the same kinds of issues, only legitimate issues. They drummed
Mhm.
up a bunch of things for Trump, but Hillary bleach bitted phones and destroyed
Yep.
emails. I believe a
Mhm.
lot of the things that she did when she was Secretary of State actually survived what we would call a statute of limitations because they're federal crimes, crimes against government and lying
Mhm.
to Congress, et cetera. And then, of course, the Bidens. And so everyone's really, as opposed to it being them all looking at her and saying, we want someone, we have a vision, we want the first woman. It's not that. They're all seeking to protect themselves and insulate themselves from future prosecutions, which this is
Yep.
now a door that's opened by them.
Exactly. And I'm gonna take it a little deeper because I'm a spiritual man. I live by that word my whole life, my 33-year marriage, et cetera. Is that back in October, I was on another network and it just hit me. I said, this is October 2023. I said, this is going to be the season of exposure. And I say that to say, because I'm looking back the journey of Trump coming down the escalators, which everyone knows I was with him from the very beginning, and the journey we've been through for the 17 candidates we had to fight, the fake impeachment hoax, two of them, these phony indictments at Jack Smith and Alvin Bragg and Letitia James and Fonnie Willis and these 51 heads of agencies signing off saying that the laptop is Russian. The list goes on and on and on. And then, of course, the tragedy last week with the president. And then you have to believe that there's something bigger than this whole quote political movement. And this is all part of the unveiling of the lie, cheat, and deceit and the darkness that's coming out. And so you're right. I think it's not kind of like, President Trump got accused of he's going to be retribution. In his course, he says retribution is actually winning.
Hmm.
But these people will eventually get their day. And it's not our time, obviously it's God's time. But I just believe that this is the season of a lot of things being exposed. You look at some very high profile people, you look at some very high profile pastors, you look at high profile leaders, et cetera, et cetera. This is not coincident. Stacey, there's something changing and there's a shift moving. There's a great wealth shift going on. There's a lot of shifts going on as it relates to our structures historically. That's been controlled by pay to play for many, many decades on both sides of the aisle. And remember, the reason why you're getting a lot of this flack, especially with President Trump, is that remember he said he won't take special interest money and he won't take pay to play. And then if you look at all the candidates who operate like that, just look around. There's some in Congress, there's some in Senate, and even our local city council seats, et cetera. If you really take a close look at those particular individuals, how much scrutiny and what they come under is because they're standing in agreement with that. So against a system, quote, and listen, I go back to 1980, that has historically been run by K Street, and so this is the great interruption going on. So to your point, I really believe that a lot of darkness will come to light. And, like my mom used to say, honey, you can run, but you still got to answer to the Lord. So it don't really matter about what y'all got going
Yeah,
on here.
and she's right. She's right. And so it looks like the Bible even describes this, that the wicked look as if they're prospering, but
Yeah.
in reality all of the riches of the wicked are stored up for the righteous. But even more importantly, because the riches are important, but they're not ultimately the end of the story. The end of the story is that all things will come to a
To
place of
light.
judgment and they'll be brought to light. They'll
Yeah.
be made
Yeah.
right by Jesus Christ. His work on the cross
Yep.
transcends our political realities. And I love that you're bringing this back to this most basic precept because it's a time of turmoil and people are
Mhm.
feeling. I think in years past, people would say, I feel frightened or I'm worried for the country. Now people are kind of flabbergasted. It's like, what kind of hellish hellscape are we in? The
Mhm.
reality that we're in is that a woman who can literally, she can't get through a speech without a platitude or a repetitive statement about unburdened by what was. And then she goes off into that analogy again and again and again. This is a woman who wasn't a good prosecutor. She was vindictive. She didn't seek justice. She sought retribution. Then she was
Yeah.
elevated by Barack Obama just because I think he thought, here's a black woman of prominence in a major state. She could be the future of the Democrat Party. He didn't spend any time looking into her. He didn't think about her extramarital affairs, things that had gone on in the past, which are now kind of moot politically. It doesn't really matter. But Bruce, I
True.
think when you talk about the spiritual things, we have to root ourselves in those and ground ourselves in that truth, in the reality of Jesus Christ and his work on the cross and all of the truth of the Bible. Otherwise, it's a time that it just grinds you down. It makes you tired, the politics of all of this. We have a minute left. Close this out. What do we expect next?
Well, I'm optimistic. I'm very calm. I remember going through all the, especially from the me being in the national forefront, speaking for President Trump. I've dealt with Charlottesville, I've dealt with everything imaginable that we had to deal with. But I've always had this really light inside of me to say, it may look pretty rough, whatever, but the best change is when things get extremely uncomfortable. If you look at that historically, and especially the audience, ask yourself, what are the best things that's happened to me? Is when things were very uncomfortable. And so, yes, it's very uncomfortable now, but there is a light that I see at the end of this tunnel. So I'm very optimistic. A lot of people are taking a look at their faith. Churches are growing back. Some are closing because they're not they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, but others are growing, and people are taking a more interest in God and Christ. Like, maybe I need
Love
to
it.
take a close look. So that keeps me motivated, not the doom and gloom,
Absolutely.
because they don't control that.
So, Bruce, I love that. And we'll have to pick it up next time. I so appreciate you joining me on the show today. Bruce Lavelle, business owner and close friend of President Trump. Thank you for being with me.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. And coming up after this S&C fast break, now that Kamala Harris is the new presumptive nominee for the Democrats, let's look into who she is. We'll be right back.